Welcome to the Painting of the Week podcast, where we look at some of the most significant paintings throughout history. Introducing your hosts, Phil Grabsky and Laura Bentham.
Welcome to this week's Painting of the Week. And we have one of our specials this week. We are delighted, honoured to have the author Christpoher Gorham with us. When I say with us, he's talking to us from Boston in the United States. And Laura and I are, as always, in Brighton. Now, Christopher, as we're recording this, he has released this book in the United States. It's coming out on the 30th of September 2025. For those of you listening to this before that date, in the United Kingdom. And I am absolutely sure it will be released, translated further afield as the weeks, months, and years go by. The title of the book, Matisse at War, Art and Resistance in Nazi-Occupied France. Some of you hopefully have seen the film that we made about Matisse. It was one of our first exhibition on screen films. It was based on the exhibitions at Tate Modern and at MoMA, specifically looking at Matisse's late cutouts, but we did a whole biography that kind of peppered itself through the film. And having read this book, I have learned so much more than I did when I did the research for that first film. I genuinely have to say the book is tremendous and not only tells you an awful lot about Matisse, of course, but also just about France during the war. And I mean this in the nicest possible way. I read it over 2 or 3 days. It's perfectly pitched in terms of its accessibility and its erudition. And it's obviously very well researched. And I learned, as I say, an enormous amount, both about France and about Matisse. Next to me, Laura has her copy of the book.
I read it over a bit longer than you, Phil.
But absolutely, I mean, it's an artwork in itself because the amount of coloured stickers. But that's Laura, and that's because there's so many things in there that she's highlighted that she wants to reread and remember.
Yes, I do.
Christopher, hello.
Hello. Hello, Phil and Laura.
Glad
to be here, and thank you for the kind words.
You're very welcome. Hopefully after 80 or so podcasts, you will know by now, but the picture that we're about to talk about is, if you go to 7th-art.com, press the podcast button, then you will see the painting under discussion. You can also go to our YouTube channel. We asked Christopher, and of course there's much choice, many paintings to choose from, but we asked Christopher to choose a painting to talk about, at least for some of the podcast, of course. And the painting that he chose was Woman Reading at a Yellow Table. Now, Christopher, let me start by asking, of all the paintings you could have chosen, what drew you to this one?
Well, Phil, there was certainly a great temptation to choose one of the cutouts because I talked about those late career paper cutouts, decoupage that Matisse did during the war, during the occupation. But when I saw Woman Reading at a Yellow Table at Musée Matisse in Nice, something about it really spoke to me, and it could have been that I was on, high alert to see any indications of the tricolor, which I think he did embed, however subtly, in the painting. But the more moving to me was just the idea that the regime that he was dealing with was so male-dominated and, anti-book and anti-intellect and anti-art in some ways. And here's this painting that fights back against all of that in one canvas. And also a painting at a time when he wasn't painting a lot. He was doing, of course, the cutouts with scissors and paper. So that's why I chose that painting. I think it spoke to me in a lot of different ways as a resistance painting in a way.
It's only 80 odd years ago. It's really not that long ago. But there will be plenty of people that perhaps don't know even the most basic history of France in the Second World War. And I actually got a much greater sense of the Vichy regime and, the amount of right-wing sympathizers that were in France pre-war and during the war I mentioned Vichy because Matisse is living in Nice. He's in the south, at least for part of the war. That's under the Vichy regime, and then ultimately Germany takes over all of France. But could you just tell us, just give us a little bit of background information about? You talk about the regime. What is the regime that, at least at the start of the war, the first few years, that Matisse is living under?
Well, there in the 1930s, France, like a lot of countries in Europe, had a fair number of right wing, extreme right wing people that were eager to have that government come into place. So when the fall of France happens in June of 1940, um, the decision was made to carve up France, of course, into two parts: the occupied German occupied North and the collaborationist South, housed at Vichy. Nice, where Matisse winds up, was this sliver of land down in the southeast that was actually placed under Italian jurisdiction because, of course, Mussolini had taken this opportunity in 1940 to attack France, and of course didn't get very far with that assault. But nonetheless, when the armistice was signed up, the area around Nice was under Italian jurisdiction. So, theoretically, it's under fascist jurisdiction, but it was also because the Italians did not see it as their mandate to hunt down Jews, for instance, or do some of the Nazis' dirty work. It was sort of a haven, at least for the first few years of the war, a haven of relative normality in Hitler's Europe.
It's been very interesting because I've been talking to people specifically about that, about how you have to look at the shades of grey of any situation. And it's very easy, and my personal position quite right, to condemn Mussolini and fascism. But one has to think, well, hold on a second. It is interesting. They didn't, and I got this from your book, condone the expulsion of Jews, and they knew what that would probably mean. And you give reasons for that, which are very interesting. And it wasn't really until the Germans decided to take over all of France that some of those horrors began, which, again, as your book talks about, did affect Matisse's family directly. But just looking at Matisse, now he's he's separated from his wife, who's in Paris. Both sons, one son is involved with the resistance, the other son is in the United States, carving out a successful career as a gallerist, but also involved in helping the resistance. What do we know about Matisse? I mean, is he just hiding himself away, only interested in his own painting? Or is he thinking, how do I navigate these awful conditions to communicate with my artwork, but not be arrested?
I think clearly he was wrestling with the war and anxiety over the fate of his sons, his daughter, his family, and his friends. I mean, his dealer Paul Rosenberg obviously had to flee to the United States, and his gallery in Paris was looted. So, and other friends of Matisse who were in harm's way in the occupied zone. And I go back, Phil and Laura, all the way to his sort of massive paintings from World War I. Bathers by the River, the Moroccans, the piano lesson, and that was a real pivotal turn for him that left collectors and commentators sort of clueless or confounded, because you have this painter who is known for his bright, vibrant color, painting these battleship gray and dark blues and these figures that are somewhat like extraterrestrial and very not lifelike and not vibrant. And he was really, Matisse was aiming to translate his emotions, but in a time of tranquility. So he wasn't, painting the charge of the Light Brigade. Time would have to pass, and he would have to sort of filter these anxieties and these events before committing it to canvas. And he did this in World War I and again in World War II. The cutouts that I'm sure we'll talk about a little later are in many ways images that are some of his most latently violent. There's a sense of surveillance in some. There's a sense of loss of control of your body in others, which wouldn't be surprising because of his illness that left him rather immobile. But I think the answer is that he interpreted these events, and his paintings, if we really, really look hard at them and look long at them and look at them multiple times, I think we can start to see the outline of that anxiety and that pain.
I think, yeah, I love the listening to you two talk because I said this to you before, Christopher. I would never, and this is not being rude, I just would never have picked up a book about the war and read it. And so I'm coming in from a completely different angle. When I read Matisse's story, a man who lived through two world wars and was unable to really partake in them anyway. First World War was too old, and obviously then he was just too ill and everything else that went with it. But the emotion, and I love the stories. And what was nice for me was there was a lot of jeopardy about the stories because I didn't know the endings of some of these stories, especially the last few chapters. So I was absolutely just completely taken by the emotion and how he was so bedridden to get up every day and try to make those cutouts when I know he had the help of the women that helped him through. It was, and it comes across so beautifully. The actual book to me was filled with love and emotion for his family and for his country as well, and what he was trying to achieve. And that's
I'm
what I
glad you
love.
say that. I'm glad you say that, Laura. And just so listeners sort of can, this is just one of the basic outlines of Matisse's life.
Mm.
The doctors thought he was going to die in 1941.
Yeah,
And if not 1941, then certainly the abdominal operation, the emergency operation that he had in 1941 might have killed him in 1942. But the idea that he was then going to live what he called a second life or a grace period,
Yeah.
yeah,
that was the odds of that were not very good. So all the more pathos to me when I was doing the research, to see this man in his second life dealing with the darkest days, really.
yeah.
Certainly, World War I would have had some dark days with his sons both serving in the French army, but a terrible series of events befell France in his second life, and then he had to wrestle with that in his art.
One of the comments in your book is he says that the very act of painting upheld the values of humanism. So if one was seeing this picture in a gallery, I believe it's in Nice, this particular
Yes.
painting. Don't go away. Sorry about that. You could, I mean, it is possible for someone to come up and look at it and, okay, there's a woman looking at a book.
Yeah.
Maybe you notice the vase of flowers and then you move on. Now, what we want to always encourage people to do is, hold on a minute, take a closer look. So what would you point out for us? What should we notice in this painting that perhaps would be, who is the model? Do we know what the book is? Are there flowers? There seems to be some lemons there, perhaps. Are they just the image of a flower, but you have the red and then there's a bit of white and the blue, and so that's for the French flag. Perhaps you could just explain a little bit more about, if you're standing next to the painting, what would you point our eyes towards?
Sure, absolutely. Matisse's first English language biographer, Alfred Barr, counseled his painting students here not far from Boston when he was teaching at Wellesley way back in the 1920s to look at pieces of art and to look at them again and to look at them again and maybe even keep looking at them. And that's really when you're standing in front of that painting, what you see, what struck me at first were there's like almost like a flag-like look about the painting. There's in the background, there's a blue, Matisse's favorite color. The top half of the background is blue, a beautiful blue. The bottom half is yellow. And, at the time I saw it in Nice, the war in Ukraine is happening. So you're almost, the Ukrainian flag is topmost in my mind, the wheat fields of Ukraine and the blue sky. And the figure is interesting. The model was a young woman from Vence, where Matisse was living at the time, not far from Nice, but who had a Dutch background. Her name was Annelies Nelk, and she was 19 or 20, a painter herself. And she is one of the people that goes to visit Matisse and Lydia Delectorskaya in 1943 and 1944. And I think it's worth saying that who the others were. Not only Annelies Nelk, a painter who was married to a Dutch resistance fighter who unfortunately did not survive the war. Henri Cartier-Bresson also was a visitor to Vence. He apparently fled from a German labor camp and made his way to Vence to meet the great Matisse and took wonderful photographs of him with the pigeons in his hand while he's painting it with the other hand. And the third visitor at this time was the poet of the resistance, Louis Aragon. So I think that the a young woman who's married to a resistance fighter, Cartier-Bresson, who escaped from a German labor camp, and the poet of the resistance, that tells us something about Matisse. The model Annelies Nelk, blonde hair, again the Dutch background, but as I point out in the book, and if you'll indulge me just reading a very short passage,
Sure.
I want to talk about where I talk about the commonality with a poem that was written by Louis Aragon, the poet of the resistance. Like Aragon, Matisse's respect for women was at odds with the Platonist or the Vichy view that a woman's place was in the home and the Nazi fetish of the male conquest. The golden hair in his poem La Diane Française is transformed into, quote, the fire of approaching liberation. And here we have this painting by Matisse with the golden haired young woman, Annelies Nelk, and she is cradling a book. She's not just reading it, and it looks like an art book. It looks like there are images rather than words, but she is hugging or cradling this book again against a regime that was throwing books onto the pyre.
Yeah.
Throwing books into a roaring fire to get rid of things that they didn't like in the regime. And here's this, called her sort of a modern day Marianne, that French symbol of liberty and brotherhood and equality. And maybe I was taking Alfred Barr's recommendation too far, but to keep looking at this, all of these themes came out. A respect for women, a respect for the arts, the colors used, a flag of tranquility, not a red flag with the sort of tank wheel of the swastika, but a flag of beautiful sky and blue, beautiful yellow. And it spoke to me. And of course, the tricolor, maybe it's pomegranates for red, but a little blue and a little white. I don't think that that's accidental. I think
Yeah.
Matisse painted that on purpose.
And because, again, it's in your book, but this isn't an isolated event. I mean, the other paintings that he's doing this time, and indeed the cutouts, you can also read similar commentary, can't you?
Absolutely. And Phil, what's one of the interesting things about the woman reading at a yellow table is just the fact that it's a painting. At a time when, because of his emergency abdominal surgery back in 41, he finds it very difficult to stand at the easel. So he's in a chair, sometimes in a wheelchair, sometimes sitting up in bed. And rather than painting, he's taking these sheets of colored paper, brightly colored paper,
Mm.
and with the shears and the scissors that he remembers from his boyhood, where they were great weavers and textile workers, he starts cutting these amazing shapes into the cutouts, which became sort of his calling card late in his career in terms of his art. And a lot of people, if we can close our eyes and think of Matisse's imagery, like the shirt that Laura's wearing right now, think of the cutouts, the blue nude, and for instance, or others. But the cutouts during the war, like we talked about earlier, were many of them images of violence and loss of control.
Yeah. It's quite extraordinary when I made the film about the cutouts and saw there's not a great deal of footage, but there's footage of him cutting through the paper that Lydia would have prepared for him, his assistant, maybe more than that, but his assistant. I remember going to MoMA where they brought out the swimming pool to show me, and
Wow.
it's staggering. And of course, for people who don't know, because he's bedridden, he's really a very ill man. He's bringing the garden into his own bedroom, covering
Yes.
all the walls, and in fact, even the ceiling. He did
Yes.
drawings on the ceiling with this charcoal on a long stick. I mean, he's quite beautiful.
People who visited him at this time, 43, 44, remarked on that. They said he it's a Francois Gillot. The word, the specific words I'm not retrieving right now, but it was this wonderland. It was
Yeah.
this fantasy world of Matisse. He had to have his props. He had to have the birds and the textiles on the wall. In some cases, just to cover up the sunlight. But the
Yeah.
other thing that you mentioned, Phil, that I would respond to is when I saw the book of cutouts at the Met. So the Met has a copy, like all leading museums would have a copy of that. Those colors are so vibrant as to almost shock you.
Right.
When the curator Jennifer Farrell brought those out, and we had about a 3 hour discussion over them. Um, just amazed at the vibrancy and the staying power of those colors. It really is an amazing thing. His One of Matisse's doctors said, sometimes you have to wear sunglasses because the sunlight coming onto these bright colors will hurt your eyes. I mean, and you can really see why that eye doctor might have made that comment.
Do you think his friends, Christopher, noticed the little hidden messages? Did the people, his friends, the resistance and things like that, would they have noticed those hidden messages? Because he wasn't never arrested.
Of course, right. Laura, the answer I think is absolutely yes. And I want to go back to something that Francois Gillot said. Gillot
Mhm.
is Picasso's companion during the war. She's much younger than Picasso, but a painter in her own right. And she was well aware that you had to encode in your paintings. You had to encode things to avoid the what the Germans called the referee, who would come to your show, and if they saw something anti-regime, they'd pull it off the wall. She was very, very cognizant of that. And she speaks about one of her own works that where she had it was like an eagle and a talon, and there was pain, but it was diffused in such a way or coded in such a way. She was very, very clear that Matisse was doing the same thing. He was not a symbolic painter, but he did turn to some symbolism in the war. The wolf, for instance.
Oh yeah.
His daughter has been arrested by the Gestapo. He doesn't know where she is, and one of his cutouts literally is called the wolf. Lydia said it has the blood-stained eye, and years later, Riva Castleman, who's the curator at MoMA, says, to her it was a stand-in for the Gestapo. And, his beloved daughter Marguerite is in the jaws of the beast.
Yeah.
I mean, there are plenty of contemporary resonances where if you speak out against a powerful regime, you might be shut down.
Mm.
I guess that's as far as we can go without risking litigation. But it's horrifying, really, at a time when we're supposed to be encouraging free speech. But free speech,
Yes, I mean it's absolutely, open mind or closed mind. I mean, we all ought to have the tolerance to hear opposing views and decide them on the merits.
so Laura just made reference there. I was going to ask, when he created this painting, for example, was there still the opportunity to put it on the show? Did it stay in Vence? Did it go to a private collector? I mean, it's one thing to create something with a message, but it has to be presented to an audience. So do we know the journey of this painting? Was it seen by a general public?
I don't know that it was, and honestly, I don't know what if it found its way into the home of a collector or not. Obviously, it's still at the Musée Matisse in Vence today. They have a fair amount of Matisses.
In
You
Vence
know,
or in Nice? In
Oh,
Nice.
I'm sorry. It's in Nice, Musée
Yeah,
Matisse at Nice, where Creole dancer,
yeah.
women reading at a yellow table, and of course they have a lot of the props there at that museum as well. Which even the goblet that is in Woman Reading,
Hmm.
and obviously very proud of the things that they have and the art that they have. But uh, yeah, so I that's where I saw it. I wasn't sure about the travels of it between 1944, spring of 1944 when he painted it, and now. I will say though, while we're on that topic, that 5 or 6 Matisse paintings were, if you can believe this, seized by the Nazis
Yeah.
Some of those found their way into the personal collection of Hermann Goering,
I know, it's
the second in
extraordinary.
command of the Third Reich,
Yeah,
at a time when they're calling Matisse and Picasso the degenerate artists.
yeah.
But it's so cynical
So
to
we're just,
then take these
I'm,
artists.
I'm just
Art.
making a film right now, just finishing a film right now about Caravaggio.
Yes.
Same thing happens. You've got at times the church criticizing this man. Not really, I mean, more for being indecorous than blasphemous, perhaps. But then you've got cardinals like Borghese buying any of his paintings they could possibly find. It's both things happening at the same time. I have to say also that I've been very lucky in my career, and I've visited a lot of extraordinary buildings and galleries, and the Taj Mahal or the pyramids, or if you were to ask me to have my top 10, the chapel at Vence, immediately. And we were very lucky because when we went to film there, two things happened. One, the nunnery there just said, go ahead, take your time. So there was no one else around. Nobody was watching us. We just were allowed to film. And interestingly, it wasn't a sunny day in Nice.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that somehow we were thinking, oh, this is a shame. But then when we walked inside the chapel, it made no difference. You are assaulted by the color, the brilliance, the line, the message. And I think it's very interesting too, and this comes up in our films. You don't have to be religious to feel the spirituality of the works of somebody like Matisse.
Having stood in that same location in that church on a not a sunny day, but it wasn't overcast either. It was sort of a hazy day.
Yeah.
It is a very moving experience to your listeners. If you have the opportunity to go to Vence and look at the church that was designed and built by Matisse, those amazing windows, the buttercup yellow, the greens and the blues. It is like Phil said, you don't have to particularly be spiritual to feel the spirituality of that location. It is a very, very moving experience. And the change of seasons and the change of light through the course of the day is something that the sisters even comment on. You know, it's a living thing, that church.
Well, I'm going to thank you again.
That's my next trip.
Definitely. Matisse at War by
Thank you.
Christpoher Gorham is published by Citadel Press. It's already out in the United States. It's coming out in the United Kingdom on the 30th of September. We at Exhibition on Screen, you can go to 7th-art.com to watch our Matisse film. And in fact, Françoise Gillot, I remember interviewing her for our Young Picasso film.
Oh, wonderful.
And we do intend, I think it's scheduled for 2 years from now, we're going to do a new all singing, all dancing biography of Matisse, because he is undoubtedly one of the greatest artists of the last century or so. So, Christopher, thank you again. And thank you all for listening. If you enjoy this, please tell your friends, sign up to the 7th-art.com newsletter, and certainly go and read Christopher's book. Thank you very much.
Phil and Laura, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Painting of the Week podcast. For more information, please visit our website at 7th-art.com or contact us by emailing info@7th-art.com. See you next time.